So the talk for today is called While You Wait, and then the subtitle is Don't Wait, Get Moving. So the whole theme of this is to think of ways that as family members, knowing that there are wait lists, what can you do while you're waiting? What can you do that still makes you feel like you're moving your child in the right direction and moving forward? So next slide. There we are. So the first thing that I think it's important to think about is, why do we have wait lists, right? I get that question a lot as someone who has a wait list and has families waiting to get in to see me. And, there are lots of reasons. One is that there are more patients needing these types of evaluations than there are clinicians available to give them. And part of that is because, as you've seen in the news, rates of recognizing autism symptoms in children are increasing. So we have more children who are presenting with these characteristics than we did 20 years ago. And at the same time, we're actually seeing the number of specialists who have expertise to diagnose or manage autism symptoms seems to be declining. So people are retiring who used to do this work, and the training positions for new people coming into the world of developmental disabilities is actually, many times those positions are not getting filled. And general practitioners, general pediatricians, general family medicine doctors, I can speak to the medicine side maybe a little more than the psychology side, but the general training that you get in terms of developmental differences, developmental disabilities, neurodiversity is minimal in your general training. You really have to seek out additional experiences if you want to have the confidence and the expertise to be able to support families. Next slide. So one of the reasons that it is also a longer process to get an evaluation is because the process of actually assessing a child for autism can sometimes take longer. It takes a degree of skill and comfort and more time to be able to identify those symptoms of autism in a young child, and then to be able to explain it to the family and explain how to navigate all the services and resources that the family might want to access. So those visits take a little bit longer than your traditional well-child visit or sick visit with the pediatrician. And unfortunately, wait lists, when people have to wait to see a specialist, often means that they will choose to get on multiple lists so that they can try and access an early appointment as quickly as possible, but then sometimes, and that's fine, I tell families to do that, but then sometimes what ends up happening is they keep all of those appointments. So they see the specialist at this autism center and they get resources and recommendations, but they don't want to miss out on the next person's ideas, so they keep that second or that third appointment too. Sometimes maybe they're doctor shopping, maybe they're looking for a different answer or a different resource, but I think also people are just really afraid that they're missing something. And so that leads to sometimes some children get 3 or 4 evaluations while others are still waiting to get that first assessment. And sometimes what counts in terms of who can make an autism diagnosis and who and what people will accept in terms of that diagnosis can drive the wait to be longer. So in some states or some insurance companies or some agencies, they might only accept a diagnosis from someone with a certain degree or a certain license. There might be certain documentation that's required. And sometimes those barriers can lead to families having to wait longer. Next slide.
I think Sabrina's taking that. Yep, I got it. Thanks, Amanda. So on top of all of this, there are other factors that are playing into wait lists. So recently there's been an increase in self-identification on social media platforms, and we are seeing more adolescents and young adults coming in and seeking a diagnosis based off of what they've seen or heard. In addition to that, there's an increase in females being diagnosed with autism. So there's newer research that shows that the ratio of female to males with autism is more like 3-to-1 rather than 4-to-1. And on top of all that, because we have more knowledge and understanding of what autism looks like, we have people that come come in again because maybe they were misdiagnosed or not diagnosed early on, but they're continuing to have problems, and so they are requesting to be reevaluated. Next slide. So there's a study from the CDC that talked about the assessed progress and early identification of autism in the US from 2002 to 2016. So you can see that we are diagnosing at a younger age. This is also contributing to our higher wait times. But interestingly, I think the likelihood of minorities without an intellectual disability are 30% less likely to be identified with autism by age 4. So they are being missed, unfortunately. And at the same time, Black children were 50% more likely than white children to be identified with autism and intellectual disability by age 4. So these, as you can see, findings are reflecting differences in social determinants of health, including things that you were asking about in the questions. Where do they live? What do they have? What kind of resources do they have available to them? Do they have transportation? So yeah. Next slide.
So then this leads to what we really are here to talk about. So what can you do while you're waiting? We maybe can't control all of the waitlist factors as much as all of us would like to fix that problem. So there are things that can be done. What can you do while you wait? Next slide. The short answer is don't wait. Take action, find things that you can do while you're waiting to get that face time with that specialist or with that intervention provider. Next slide. So we'll talk about some specifics here. So first thing to do is explore all the ways that a child might be able to get an evaluation. So if the concern is autism and you're waiting on autism center wait lists, early intervention may be able to provide that evaluation. They may have access to a psychologist that could do that assessment and provide that diagnosis. If it's a child that's over the age of 3 or school age, it's possible that the school district could identify someone that could do that evaluation and assess for autism. And then there are sometimes community agencies. So I'm in Pennsylvania. We have community behavioral health agencies that can provide an independent assessment for a child to determine if they have autistic features that would warrant intervention, and they can do that without having to go through, say, a medical evaluation for autism like we do in my center. And then the other thing that a parent can do while they're exploring all their other evaluation options is to educate themselves. So connecting with other parents. If you suspect autism, your child doesn't have to have an autism diagnosis for you to connect with a support group or to attend a workshop or to download toolkits or to read about these symptoms and learn more. And the more that you are learning about this diagnosis, the better you may be able to understand your child. There may be strategies that you can learn that might help the child in that moment. So thinking again about some of the things we talked about with Erin, there may be strategies that the parents could learn around sleep or around communication, even before they have a name for what's going on. Next slide. And another way that parents can act even before they've seen a specialist is to think about other medical things that they could address, regardless of what the developmental diagnosis might be. So if there are speech concerns, get the hearing checked, make sure that the child can hear. If it's a child that's having constipation issues or feeding issues or other GI problems, maybe you talk to the pediatrician about those concerns. If there are sleep problems, start with the pediatrician. Pediatricians do a lot of sleep counseling for all kids, right? Not just kids on the spectrum. And if there are other behavioral concerns like ADHD or anxiety or behavior concerns, that might be something that a family could start to address, again, even without an official label or diagnosis. Next slide.
So the CDC actually has some really great material to help families monitor milestones. They have different milestones at different time frames, information for other clinicians, and you can also download their app for a milestone tracker to make sure that your child is meeting developmental milestones and that you are able to go back to your pediatrician when you have concerns and be more specific about your concerns. Next slide. So just like Amanda had said, it's so important. We want to make sure to reiterate it. If you have concerns, but your doctor maybe is taking a wait and see approach, but you're not comfortable with that, make sure you reach out to other providers to get a second opinion, reach out to other doctors, to the teacher, other therapists. And again, you can call for free evaluations to find out if your child can get support. So this is all in the US, of course, but early intervention services, there's a link to find your state's early intervention. And then if they are 3 or older, call your public elementary school. You do not need a doctor's referral to do this, and you do not need to have a diagnosis to do this. So the Child Find requires all school districts to identify, locate, and evaluate children with disabilities regardless of the severity of their disabilities. So you can look for your state Child Find specialist. Next slide. And then, make the most of your playtime with your child. Interact with them as much as possible, read books, sing songs, do chores. Make sure that you are getting them around other children. I know that is something that comes up a lot right now with COVID, that a lot of times children haven't been exposed to many other children their age. But make sure that you are trying to get them involved. I know sometimes it feels awkward to engage when it seems like they're not listening or not responding, but we are working on modeling effective communication, follow their lead when they're doing something that they're interested in, but also show them that they can do other things. Next slide. And again, support. So we have our awesome art team here to give local resources, but here are some other websites that you can reach out to that you can find local support.
Do you have any resources?
Oh, Harry, I'll have you put your question in the chat and someone will answer that for you. And then in addition to that, the toolkits are great. So I think Andrew has already put in the link for the sleep toolkit. Some of my favorites are the toilet training, sleep, eating, visual supports. These are all things that you can be doing, working with your child even before we have an official diagnosis.
And then something to keep in mind is trying to, when you do finally when your name finally comes up and you get onto that appointment, think about what's going to be the most efficient way to help the specialist that you're seeing figure out what your child's going to need. So be prepared that it might not happen in one evaluation visit. It might take a couple of visits depending on your child's symptoms and what they're trying to help with. You might need to go back a couple of times, or you might need to meet a couple of different specialists. Are there things you could bring with you to help facilitate the visit? So if the child has had a speech evaluation or an early intervention evaluation, or someone else has, or even a daycare teacher has written up a little summary of what the child's strengths and weaknesses are, bring those things along and share them with the team. If you have videos of your child engaging in a behavior that has been concerning to you, or engaging in a really nice example of a skill or a behavior, you could bring those as well. And I will say, sometimes, depending on how the visit is going, the clinician may not have time to review a long video or review a long report in that session. That's why it might be multiple evaluation sessions. But bringing as much information with you as you can and being prepared to share that with the provider is going to help them have as much data about your child as possible. And then also just mentally and emotionally be prepared that even after receiving a diagnosis, there may be other wait lists that you're having to deal with next time. Next slide.
So I spend a lot of my time talking about waiting lists. It's just an unfortunate part of my job. We are always telling families to go and do this and early intervention and doing things as quickly as possible, but we hit roadblocks all the time. And you know, there are a lot of different options available for families, and you might find that what works for you is not something that works for everyone else. It's not the best fit for your child. So just remember, we provide recommendations, but many factors play into your ability to implement these recommendations. A lot of times you are limited by what your insurance will provide or cover. It is okay, as Amanda said before, with the evaluation process, get on multiple wait lists for treatment. But again, make sure that you're being courteous, and if you find something that you are able to get, then get off of the wait list too, so other families can have an opportunity to take that spot. And then just connect with other parents. You guys already in the chat have put so many great resources in there that we didn't even think about when we were talking through all of this. So other parents are just really great resources. Next slide. I wanted to give just a list of different types of treatments available. So, you know, today isn't necessarily about going into debates or different specifics about therapy options, but just to let you know what's available out there. So, you know, for behavioral type of treatment, that would include things like ABA or parent training services for families. Developmental includes those allied therapies, so speech, OT, PT. There's a lot of group options available. There's co-treatment with speech and OT. There are YouTube videos that you can find for speech therapy, for visuals, all of these things. Educational resources, social relational resources, and then pharmacological, so of course medications if they're indicated, psychological services, and then also consider complementary or alternative services. Things like art therapy, equine therapy. Keep in mind that a lot of times insurances don't cover these type of services, but they are things that families seem to enjoy. Next slide. Talking about funding, I know, again, we have people internationally, but these are just funding services I wanted to let people know about that are federal. So SSI, Supplemental Security Income, provides monthly cash payments to help meet the basic needs of children who have a physical or mental disability. Children can get SSI if they meet the definition of a disability, and if they have limited income and resources in the household. So oftentimes families that are eligible for SSI are also eligible for Medicaid. And that brings us to the next slide. So the next slide is Medicaid. Again, it is income dependent, but there are waivers, and states have different ways of funding their waivers. So they're in different departments. I know in Ohio, the waiver is funded through the Department of Developmental Disabilities. But these waivers basically give families the ability to qualify for Medicaid and taking out their financial responsibility for some of these services. So because they might not be eligible from a financial standpoint for Medicaid, they can be eligible for these waiver services. Next slide. And we talked about this a little bit, you know, about knowing your rights as far as education support. So, you know, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is covers all special education services for children over the age of 3 through the age of 21 who have an IEP. So it provides the legal grounds for children with disabilities to receive a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. And these services are administered by the school district where the child lives. So next slide, sorry. There are 6 pillars of IDEA. So the first one is the individualized education plan. The second one is the free and appropriate public education. So districts are required to provide these services if they deem the child is eligible for them or has a need. Least restrictive environment means that they are placed in the environment where they can get the most benefit for their services. So being around their peers, but still receiving the supports that they need. In addition to that, we have the appropriate evaluation. So we can't just say, yes, this child is disabled, even if they have a report from someone else saying that they have been identified as having a disability. They need to have an appropriate evaluation completed by their school district to determine eligibility for education services. And that should always include parent and teacher participation. So they should be interviewing you and giving you forms to complete and making sure that you are involved in this process. And that's where procedural safeguards come in. You should always be given a copy of whose idea is this. You should have prior written notice anytime there's a change that's happening, anytime there's something that they need to add, or if they need to do a new evaluation, that should all be in there. So it's important on your end to document this information and make sure that you're keeping everything a paper trail of all of it. Next slide. As I said, there are the Part C of IDEA is early intervention. Children are eligible for individualized family service plan instead of an individualized education plan. But as part of Part C, they are helping to transition children to the IEP. And then on the other end of that are transition services. So IEPs must include transition services by the age of 16. And this transition plan should include the child themselves, the student and the parents, making sure that it takes their preferences and interests and skills in mind when coming up with next plans. Next slide. Other resources. So, in our state or in our hospital, I guess even, we have service coordination, care navigators, people that can help you find resources. So if you don't know if you have them, just ask. Sometimes it's people will tell you that, oh yeah, go to this other agency or reach out to these people, they can help you find things. Sometimes your insurance provider has them too. Other state-specific autism agencies like Autism Society, or we had someone talk about being a LEND trainee. These 2 websites are really great free services to give the parents some skills. So the help is in your hands is kind of some ABA videos that you can follow and learn and practice with your child. And then the caregiver skills training as well. And then again, we talked about Autism Speaks toolkits, online support groups, books. That'll take us to the next slide. These are just some books that we often recommend to families that you can kind of do things on your own. So while you're waiting for other people to become available to work with your child, you can learn about things that you can do at home with them. Next slide.
All right, Sabrina, I'm going to take it from here. One of the things that we also wanted to talk about during the series is that, Family Echo exists because, we as parents and caregivers and family members, are often leaders and managers and coordinators of these really large teams. So, some of the questions I see coming in the chat are really about interacting with all of these different people who are going to be part of your child's team, whether it's from a health perspective, a behavioral perspective, speech and therapy type of perspective. But we interact with all of these members. And I know at one point I counted all the members I interacted with on my son's team. And it was like 42 people at one year of his life. So the thing that I've also learned as a parent is that these people come and go, and they may leave us after 1 year, 2 years, things like that. And I think one of the things we want to try to do in this series is, as we talk about specific topics in autism, is also to address the fact that we're sort of, when our child, I know for me, when Henry got a diagnosis of autism, I feel like I also got the role of a lifetime, to sort of lead these teams and, be a part of them and share information. And I think that's one of the things that we really do, is try to connect the dots so that teams see all of the information. So I try to do a visual. I'm sure I'm missing some teams. So if you have thoughts of other teams that you interact with, or other, professions or clinicians, chat them in so we know that. Next slide. The other thing that, we want to just quickly talk about too is that, when you think about all of these established teams, you're going to begin to see all of these different people that you are going to interact with, right? So for example, like you've got, your own family, you've got school that you might see on a daily basis. You might have your psychology team and your treatment teams that you might meet with them monthly. OT and speech. I know that, when we were doing some of these therapies, we met with them weekly, and then my providers, I might see 1 to 2, maybe 3 times a year. So again, you're kind of connecting the dots so that everyone has the information about your child, so that again, you can start to carve these paths forward and have all of this information. And I think it's just really important as families that we understand how critical our role is on these care teams and the leadership possibilities that we have. The one thing that I always say is that if one of these teams goes stagnant, it impacts my son, right? So keeping these teams active and staying on top of them is really important. And I think when we look at the topic of today of like how to manage wait lists, again, it's, how do you make those connections? How do you do that communication so that you can continue the process so it doesn't go stagnant and you're constantly moving forward? But again, you're connecting all the dots and bringing the information, because you really are the brokers of information. You're the person who knows everything all the time that you can then share with all of these team members. Next slide. So one of the things we wanted to ask is, what skills or strategies would you like to learn, and how can we build those into the topics that we're going to be offering in the series? What kind of leadership skills do you already have within yourself? I know you already come to the table with certain things, but what else would you like to learn that might help you as, you move through the journey with autism with your child? I know I had to learn a lot of things, and I've been very thankful for the opportunity to learn some things. And I know I still have a lot to learn because he's a young adult now and it's a whole new world. So if you have thoughts, chat them in, because it'll be really helpful as we begin to build out this series. And I think we're going to go to, key learning. So Amanda or Sabrina?
Yeah, so really the highlights from this talk today are, trust your instincts. So if you're seeing something, if you have a concern, talk to your medical provider, talk to your child's teacher, to ask other people for help, and keep bringing it up because you know your child best. Sabrina, I think you have the next one.
Yeah, so I gave you a lot of information about IDEA. I think it's very important for families to know their rights. Or if you could go back to the slide, thank you. And to make sure that you're communicating with everyone, I saw lots of people say, keep records, keep journals, do all these things. Those are so important to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Are we recognized?
Yeah.
So I would say again, recognize the role that you have in this, and how important it is and how pivotal it is, and how you can make a difference by, collecting information, sharing information, and really connecting those dots between all of these team members. Never take no for an answer is what I say, and make those phone calls, be the squeaky wheel when you need to. But the other thing that I've learned in working in a clinic is that I'm incredibly grateful to all of the professionals that I work with who do work in autism, because They could have gone into any field, but they decided to work in autism. So I'm always very grateful and thankful for the time that they spend with me to help me educate. But I educate me and help me learn more so that I can do better. But I think recognizing how pivotal your role is as a family member is really something that we need to spend more time with. And so I think I'm gonna turn it back over to Amanda for the you one.
Yeah, and so, I mean, really, this chat has been so active. I know that I have not been able to read everything that people have been putting in because there've been so many great ideas. But, thinking again, as the parent, as the leader of your child's team, what would you add? What would you want to see changed or different? What would you like the team to be doing? And that's really the you part. You play such an important role.
All right, next slide.
Time for poll.
Yep, we're here for questions. We've got a few minutes to do questions, and then we're going to go to the poll. And then we've got resources.